Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into the stakes for the federal government. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst as well as former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Scott, I'll start with the news around Stellantis. How significant do you think that is against the backdrop of how they explained what they're doing, which is just, we're doing this because of Trump's tariffs? How significant do you think it is politically?
I think it's potentially very significant, both politically and economically, because sure, we will, sue them, take them to court, try to hold them to account with respect to commitments that were made and investments that were provided. But obviously, Stellantis fears the wrath of Donald Trump, a president who will use the power of his office to hammer those he dislikes. They fear him more than they fear our lawsuits. And, you have to worry that this could be the first of others. The auto sector has been heavily targeted by Trump. He said he doesn't want cars made in Canada. His Commerce Secretary has said that we should be happy to come second and that cars will no longer be made here. They're gunning for the sector, and I think it's very worrying. And it's not obvious what the appropriate response is. It's not obvious how we pull it back. So it's going to be very difficult economically, and it's going to be very difficult politically.
The federal government, the Prime Minister, the Minister in charge of the file, Corey, Dominic LeBlanc, have indicated that, they're not going to disclose the terms of what's on the table for either autos or other sectors because they've agreed with the Americans not to say much. The interesting part is that the Americans don't seem to be adhering to that agreement, right? With Howard Lutnick being as blunt as you can possibly be, as Scott alluded to, about what the Americans view the Canadian auto sector as being, like second to them, maybe buying some parts and not much else. What do you take from that, and how will it inform our approach?
Well, it's a real conundrum, I think, for the government and for governments, the Ontario government as well. Look, Trump has been inconsistent on almost everything he said over the last, 40 years that he's been commenting on politics, and I guess actually even longer than that, but never inconsistent on this one issue. He didn't like the auto pact of the 1960s. He didn't like the original free trade agreement. He didn't like NAFTA. And when he talks about what he doesn't like, autos is always at the center of the crosshairs. I guess it's not a surprise, Fashion, that this is consistent as any topic could be involving Donald Trump around what his intent is. His intent is to kill off the auto sector outside of the United States. Bad news for Mexico, bad news for Canada. What can you do to stop that? Well, you can negotiate as hard as you can. You can put pressure on him from the auto sector itself. I think all those things are happening, but I don't think there's any sign of them being effective. A lawsuit, it's maybe a small Band-Aid on a gushing arterial wound here. I don't think it's actually gonna alter the outcome for the patient. But we'll see. I think we're presiding over the dying days of auto, not just in Canada and Mexico, but possibly in the United States too, because at the end of the day, this is going to hurt American auto producers as well.
Do you think there needs to be an acknowledgement of that from the Prime Minister on down in the federal government? And I'm speaking, from a substantive but also strategic point of view, Kathleen, right? Because I think there are, hundreds of thousands of jobs that are potentially at stake. I feel like there are a lot of people saying what Corey is saying right now, given the Stellantis news and the comments from Howard Lutnick, but we aren't hearing that bluntly from the federal government.
Yeah, and I don't think you can see Prime Minister Carney or any government just openly admitting that they're going to sacrifice our auto sector on the temple of Trump. Their job, they're elected to, in fact, defend those workers and those communities and the economies that survive on not only those auto jobs, those auto manufacturing jobs, but all of the thousands and thousands of parts jobs that are spin-off jobs from that, the foam, the upholstery, the interiors that are so important to the manufacturing of a car. But I think what you saw, Carney, Carney this week really say now is the time to talk and not hit back, and why he was trying to almost quell the cacophony that was coming from the premiers, whether it was from lumber or auto, you name it, was because frankly, hopefully, optimistically, they're close to some kind of a deal, and they're trying to use, you know, aluminum and energy as leverage to try to hold on to whatever parts of the auto manufacturing sector in Canada they can. I mean, listen, Minister LeBlanc and the clerk of the Privy Council basically have permanent residence now in Washington, D.C. They've been down there working hard on a deal, and it's obvious why they're doing that. It's 2.5 weeks to a budget. Right? November 4th is coming fast. And even in the days of digital printing and fast turnaround, they still have to get the numbers, some kind of a forecast, a projection to make those tables work in that budget that's coming down the pipe. So I think that there's a hope that Carney can pull something out next week, optimistically. What that looks like, who knows? But I mean, Canada still has a lot of sway. And the one thing optimistically I would point to is that we were in a similar situation in 2018 with GM, when GM decided to pull out of Oshawa. And it wasn't necessarily the government, but it was consumer and brand damage that was inflicted on General Motors when they tried to move out of the Motor City of Oshawa. And people turned on them. Canadians turned on them. And listen, Canadians in the shopping store are going to, you know, fight for their, you know, strawberries to be Canadians at $4 a pop. They're certainly going to fight to ensure that their automotives can at least have some kind of Canadian worker footprint in them. So I think we're going to have to rely on almost like a movement that's larger than just government or lawsuits, as Corey and Scott have said. It's going to have to be broader than that.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Scott Reed, Corey Teneycke, and Kathleen Monk, our Sunday strategy session.